Okay, let's talk about functions. And functions are methods. And functions return a value to the place from which they're called. They share a lot of similarities to procedures. And really, Java programmers simply denote that there are methods. Some return a value and some don't. So let's go ahead and take a quick look at our assignment. Let's go ahead and start NetBeans. And we're going to work on Square. So I'm going to go to New Project, Java App, Next. I'm going to call it Square. Put it on the desktop, get rid of the package statement. So I'm going to get rid of the needless comments and align the curly brackets. I'm relying on you to go ahead and put in the general comments at the top so that we can get right to what we need to have done. So let's look at the PDF assignment. So basically it says that there's a few additional requirements. It's not very much, but basically this is a GUI app. And this GUI app prompts the user for the length of one side of the square. You go ahead and enter that, and you're gonna get a message dialog saying that, when the square's length is, that number is going to be formatted to 2 decimal places. The area is, and the parameter is, and those numbers will be formatted to 2 decimal places. So let's go ahead and get cracking, as they say. So we already know that we're supposed to, according to the pseudocode on here, we're supposed to go ahead and use a method here. So that's the main idea of this class here, is to create a method. And before we call it, it should exist. So let's go ahead and create the method. We can call it calculate area. I'm just going to go ahead and call it calc area. Okay, so public static. We're going to return something this time. So we'll put in double instead of void. Calc area. And it's going to receive, we're going to go ahead and create one parameter variable. It's going to receive a double. We'll just call it side. Open curly brackets, closed. Notice how you will get this error message here, and you will continue to get that error message until you put in the return statement, because it's not this function is not syntactically correct until you put in the return statement. So if you want, you can go ahead and just put it in. So we're going to calculate the area, and we're going to calculate the perimeter, however you want to pronounce it. So let's do them one at a time. So we'll say double area, and we'll calculate this as area gets side times side, and then return area. And of course, all of that could have been done on one line. So that's our first method. Notice how I put this method outside the body of main. Let's go ahead and make another method. Public. And this method's going to be a function, so static, and it's going to return a double. And let's just call this calc perimeter, right? And it's going to, it's going to receive one parameter. It's going to have one parameter definition as well. And I'm going to just shorten this to S. Now we could just do this all in one line. Now, if you want, you can go ahead and do it the same style as above. You could say double, what are we returning here? Perimeter. We could say double perimeter, perimeter gets, side times 4, and then return perimeter. If you want to do it like that, you can go ahead and do it like that as well. So this particular application is going to require a GUI. It's going to be a GUI app, and it's going to require that the numbers be formatted to 2 decimal places. So let's come up here above and enter in those 2 import statements. So the first one, we're going to import would be, we're going to go ahead and import which class? The decimal format class. And then we're going to import the J option pane. So that we can, we're going to go ahead and use the methods of the J option pane class to use the show input dialog and the show message dialog. Okay, so let's import javax. Remember, swing. All right, so those are our 2 import statements. And we're ready to get into main and start doing. First thing, if you look at the PDF, it gives you some pseudocode. Basically, what we're going to do is we're going to receive input. We're going to prompt the user for what is the length of one side of your square. We're going to get that string. We're going to put it in a number that has to be parsed. We've been doing that for a long time now. Then we're going to go ahead and call the methods and put the return in a variable. We don't necessarily have to do it this way, but I want to go ahead and partition that out. And then we're going to show the results in a dialog. We could certainly call the method as we're building output, but I like to go ahead and separate my input from my processing from my output. So let's just go ahead and segregate these steps. So let's start off with creating a prompt. And I'm going to use the word response. I could change it to like prompt, you know, but we use response so much, you know, but, you know, you could still partition this out a little bit, you know, a little bit more. You know, like say, for example, the prompt part of this. Watch this. You can say prompt. And we can go ahead and say, what is the length of one side of your square? All right. Then we can go ahead and pass that to the show input dialog. It just makes your strings, it makes your lines of code smaller and more. I think it's easier to understand this way. It's not the way that your book does it, but it's the way that I like to do it. I like to go ahead and partition things into smaller parts on here. So what we're going to do then now is we're going to use the show input dialog. And in this, the arguments here will be 2. We'll pass null and prompt. So basically, it gets that string and it puts it in there. If you wanted to, you could have just typed that in here. You could have just typed in that string right in here, but then it would have extended past this line. So I'm making my code neater looking, simpler looking, by thinking ahead. So I know everything that comes in from the GUI is a string. So I'm going to have to go ahead and parse it, right? All right. So that's our input. That's our prompt. Now we're going to go ahead and perform calculations. And our calculations, we can get them, are going to be done by calling the methods. So double area gets calc area and pass it length. And then we can say double perimeter gets calc perimeter. And we pass it length again. Okay. So what we have here on lines 12 and 13, these are method calls. Over here on line 19 and 28, those are called method definitions. All right. So when I call calc area, I pass it length. Length goes into side. Side is then multiplied times side to get area, and I return area. So this return statement must match with what I said I'm returning. If I say I'm returning a double, I must return a double. So when I return area, it's going to come right here and assign the return to area. So it comes right here to line 12, and this is an assignment statement. So an assignment statement assigns whatever's on the right to what's on the left. Okay. So the only thing left to do now is to go ahead and show my output, build my output. Let's go ahead and create the decimal formatter. Okay, so the decimal formatter object. I'm just going to go ahead and call it DF. Got to use a new keyword because it's an object. We're going to create an object from this class. And the pattern that we're going to want it to have is optional, 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 period, and then required, required. All right. So that's our decimal formatter object. So DF is an object, and I create the object so I can use the format method of that object to format the data. So the next thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to build my string. So I'll say string, and I'll just call it output. Gets, and I'll say when squares length is, and I'm going to do the formatting later. I'm going to go ahead and run this without the formatting and come back and format it, so you can understand the process here. So if I wanted to, I could just go ahead and get right to the point and show the output and go back and fine tune this. So let's just go ahead and do that. Show message dialog. In this case, we're going to pass null and output. All right. So I know I'm going to have to come in here and build line 17 a little bit more, but let's just go ahead and let's go ahead and run it like this. And let's run it with the test data that's in the PDF. Remember, if you have the idea ever since day one is that the PDF is really important, and PDF gives you test data. You should use the test data to make sure your program is working right. You use the PDF to make sure that your output matches what is being requested. All right, so what is the length of one side of your square? Is everything spelled right? So the test data is 3.8. So it says when the square's length is 3.8. And you know, we're almost there. We're not finished. So if you go ahead and look at the output that's in the book, we have to have a blank line, and then we have to make a statement about the area and the perimeter. Okay. So this is running in the background. There it is right there. Notice how it says 3.8. We want it to be 3.80. I know that's what you call paying attention to detail. If I provide you with a PDF and I tell you that I want 3.80, that's what you're going to need to provide in order to get 100. I'm not being picky. That's the requirement. Anybody that's a programmer knows that you got to pay attention to detail. And this is where you're learning how to pay attention to detail. All right, so we'll come back and format that later on. Let's go ahead and continue to build the output string. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and use the abbreviated output, the abbreviated concatenation on here. plus equals. We're going to go down a line here. So it's a backslash n, and guess what? Another backslash n. All right. And we're going to go ahead, because we want that blank line on here. In fact, let me just go ahead and show you what happens if we just have one. That way you can understand what's going on here. So we'll say the area is, and concatenate that with pattern.format. Nope, df.format. And we pass it, in this particular case, we're going to go ahead and pass it the variable name of area. And then we're going to go ahead and do this again. I'm going to copy this, live life dangerously. In this case, we're going to pass I'm going to format perimeter. I said I wasn't going to do the formatting, but I did it anyway. Well, yeah, for length, I'm not doing it for length. I'm doing it for these two done over here. And we'll say the perimeter is, right? Okay. So it's pretty much done it all except for this length thing. So let's see what happens when I do it. So 3.8, and it continues. And notice how I've got the area is 14.44 and 15.20. What's missing is two things. I need to have 3.8 formatted to 2 decimal places, and I need a blank line, right after the first statement. So let me go ahead and do that. So for length, I'm going to just double click on this, do a control X. This is the way I like to do it, and say df.format, and then do a control V, put that in there. Now, what else did I need? Oh, I needed another line. To do another line here, I would do a backslash n. So let's run this again. So notice I have backslash n. That gives me that blank line. It's a carriage return. It's a new line. So 3.8. So now it's looking back to the PDF. I can see that what I have here matches. And I have satisfied the requirements of this lab assignment. I have used methods. And a lot of people, some students say, well, it's not a whole lot of code here. Why don't you just put all that inside main? Well, the whole idea here is to understand how a method works. That's all we're doing. This is just like a little test program. So let's go over this again. There's two kinds of methods. There's procedures and functions. Okay. We use the word procedure, or some people use the word procedure, to denote a method that does not return a variable. These particular methods here don't have the word void. So therefore, these methods are referred to as functions. All right? The return statement must agree with the return type. The number of parameters that you have here, very important, because when you call a method, and then calling the method is simply reiterating the name of the method and then passing it an argument. We pass arguments. When we define the method, we create a parameter variable, okay? And there must be agreement between arguments and parameters in terms of three things: number, sequence, and type. But today we're focusing on functions. And what makes this a function here is this return type right here and the return statement. If you don't have a return statement, you're going to get an error message. See how I'm commenting out my return statement only to find out that it says missing return statement. Luckily, sometimes you actually get feedback from the editor that's meaningful, that you can actually understand. Okay. So that's pretty much the program on here. This is about methods, and it's going to play a really, really important part when we go into object-oriented programming. But for now, you have a pretty good foundation, and thank you. Professor Benavides out.